From LateNighter.com, it's Inside Late Night with Mark Malkoff.
Hey everybody, John Schneider back here from Late Nighter getting you set up for Mark's conversation today with Jonathan Groff, who was once a writer for The Jon Stewart Show and then eventually became the head writer for Late Night with Conan O'Brien. Jonathan joins Mark to tell some great stories about his career in late night in an interview that was recorded in 2 parts, so just want to give you a heads up for that. You'll be hearing the whole interview today, but at some point you may notice that the camera switches to different angles because it was recorded over 2 different days, but we are so thrilled to have Jonathan here on the podcast, and I hope you enjoy this conversation between Mark and Jonathan Groff.
Jonathan Groff, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Mark. How's it going?
Good. Now, the last time I saw you, and we've met a bunch of times, but this was a long time ago when you were at Conan. The last time I saw you was literally the day before you were moving. You and your wife were moving to Los Angeles. You were still in New York. I remember running into you. I think it was in the Chelsea area is my recollection. I'm guessing, if I had to guess, like 8th Avenue, maybe something around there. Maybe in the 20s, and I ran into you, and I just said hi to you, and we'd met a bunch of times, and you told me, you're like, I'm moving to Los Angeles tomorrow. So yeah, that was the last time, long time ago.
That would have been, let's see, probably July of 2002. I moved that summer. I left Conan as the head writer in September of 2000, and managed to stay in New York a couple more years while doing half-hour stuff and actually working on that TV show Ed that was created by other late night people, Rob Burnett and John Beckerman. And then the jig was up. I made a pilot. I made 2 pilots while still living in New York, and then they were like, "You got to move to LA." And so we bought a house and moved to LA. And my wife was pregnant, so we had our second kid in LA.
I remember you telling me that you did a pilot for Jason Bateman taking place in Chicago where he was a school teacher. Do I have that right?
What an incredible memory. Yes, that's exactly right. And it had actually gotten ordered to series and had been announced in May. We made 7 episodes of it. It was called The Jake Effect. You can find it on YouTube. Might even be somewhere on, I don't know if I guess Universal doesn't really have like a website. They used to have it on some Universal archive, but I think you can find it on YouTube. It was a cool show. It was a single camera, kind of fast moving, strong narrator telling Jason Bateman's character story, Jake. And yeah, he was living in Chicago and being a school teacher, and it was Bateman's first big single camera job before he got Arrested Development, and he was really good in it. And I think it made its way. We only made 7 episodes, and NBC never put it on the air, but it made its way over to Fox and to the studio that made Regency, I think, TV, which had something to do with Arrested, or I guess that was also obviously Imagine. But anyway, they saw Jason, and he was so good in it, and I think it helped him get that the Arrested Development gig. Basically, I am completely responsible for Jason Bateman's success.
Exactly.
1,000%, and he will acknowledge this in writing. I have it in a file right here. No.
Exactly. So you've done so much in your career. I told Robert Smigel once that, and I said this on the podcast, that I feel like the strongest in terms of the writing when Conan was when Robert was head writer, the early on years, and when you were there. And you hired some really, really funny people like Greg Cohen, who did The Search for Grady, and people like Tommy Blacha, just really big staples. Was Brian Stack one of your hires?
Yes, I actually didn't hire Tommy Blacha. Marsh McCall hired him in the spring of '95. And I think Marsh also hired Brian McCann around the same time. I don't think I hired Brian. I think my first real hire was Brian Stack, because once Tommy got comfortable and settled in, we didn't really have any attrition right away until Tommy actually broke his leg so horribly he was going to miss a bunch of work. So I got to hire. Greg was one of the first people I hired, and then Brian Stack. And then I did hire like John Glazer, which I'm pretty proud of.
Oh, he did great over there. Very prolific. Someone like Tommy, though, I found so interesting because Andy knew him previously. They were friends. Tommy, had been in the Army, not a traditional, maybe with comedy writers of this generation. And I heard Conan talk about this once, that there was almost nothing in his writing packet that would have been usable on the show, which is very rare because normally if somebody submits something, you're writing for Letterman, you're writing for whatever. It's like stuff that would easily get on. And Conan went on to say that I think his first cycle he got almost nothing on at all, which a lot of shows are gone. But Tommy was such an impact on that show. Did you ever see Tommy's packet? What was it like for him to get hired with stuff that didn't necessarily
I'm
fit
not
the show?
sure. So I started in January of 1995. Mike Sweeney and I were hired like at the exact same time, and Marsh McCall hired me and Mike, and then I think his next hire uh, was Tommy, and I think it was a very much of a trust me situation. There's this famous sushi chef in L.A. called I forget his first name, but his last name is Nozawa, and has a bunch of great, amazing sushi restaurants in LA. And he has basically you go into his restaurant, his original restaurant in Studio City, and there's just a thing, trust me, which is don't ask questions, just let me serve you great food. And I think to some extent Tommy was a trust me from Andy Richter, and Andy had such credibility and clout, especially at this point in the show, and he was proving to be so funny, and he was a funny writer. I think Andy was a little bit like to Conan, he's great. Tommy's brilliant. You'll love him. And then I bet there was stuff in the packet. I didn't look at the packet. I don't remember because I was just a staff writer. That was probably funny, but it was too weird to probably get or too out there. But I think, and I do remember Marsh at the time sort of saying like almost in confidence, like, yeah, Tommy, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. And I think Conan's recollection is kind of right. I just think he got comfortable. I think Tommy Blatchett is one of the funniest, pin you to your seat, hilarious people you will ever meet in your life. And I think as a colleague of his for the first 4 or 5 months, like I just was so delighted by how funny he was that when I got the head writer gig, maybe I was better at seeing what his strengths were. But I also think it's just he got comfortable. The show got more and more of its own sea legs. And I think but he was such a huge part. Literally, I was just thinking this morning about what you and I might talk about, and I was remembering a favorite Tommy thing, which was Embryonic Rockabilly Polka Dotted Fighter Pilots, which was just this random satellite TV channel that he pitched and executed. And he was a great producer too. Like his stuff always looked great, and he had a great feel for music. And he was always somebody we could send on remotes with Conan or Andy, and he'd come up with hilarious stuff.
I remember when he did the gaseous wiener, and they did it a bunch of times. And I think you were the one that put the first person to come out, and it was like the third time they did it or something, and put ketchup on the on the hot dog or the gaseous wiener. I don't know if you remember that. They would throw you in sometimes.
Every once in a while, yeah. I remember that when Tommy broke his leg that summer, I think it was the summer of '97 or spring of '97, and it broke it so badly he literally could not work. Like he had to be homebound for months. We did a letter writing campaign for the gaseous wiener to cheer him up, and people would write and send photos and fan fiction essentially, or fan art. It was pretty cool.
I remember an Act 5 with you, and I thought you might have done it more than once, where you were an audience member with really long hands? Do I have that right?
I can't remember that.
They were just arms.
Oh, and maybe like I reached in and touched something. They did some movie magic or something. I can't
could have
remember. I do
been.
remember doing that.
It was something like that. Would another writer throw you in? Would you occasionally, since you have stand-up experience, would you throw yourself in bits, or how would that work when you normally would be on camera?
Every once in a while, like if I had the right look or the right feel. I remember Brian Rich just thought I would be funny he did a bit where it was something about like how smell lines could levitate even real people, like cartoon smell lines could levitate real people. And I remember I got I think it was the only time I ever flew, which is they come up with that rig that actually lifts you up and Peter Pans you across the stage. And I got to be in one of those once. I think Brian cast me in that partly because I had this kind of earnest, wide-eyed look to me and kind of clean cut thing, and I just was this goofy guy who like gets levitated by cartoon smell lines and flown into scenes. I don't even remember what the bit was. I am a victim, as much as America is a victim of the election recount in 2000, which resulted in George W. Bush being elected. I was a victim because I did a pretty good Al Gore. And because he was not elected president, I did not get to be the lips, but just a few times. I'd already left the show by that time anyway. I left the show in, I guess, fall of 2000. I was moving on, but I'm still in New York, and I would have been happy to be the guy who would have been Al Gore. But I just remember I said, Conan, I won the popular votes. I'm popular. So that was my.
That's really strong. I used to see you over at Saturday Night Live. I would get myself in. Sometimes people would be nice enough to get me up to the green room, which was on the ninth floor, overlooking the studio, and I'd see you sometimes. And I wanted to know what that experience was like going to the show. Will Ferrell was on the cast that year. I think that was his first year, and people like Sherry O'Terry and Catan and Norm was still doing Update.
Well, I mean, just working in 30 Rock in general was like walking into like a temple on some level. Like I loved, and I didn't ever lose sight of that. Working in that building, coming in on the first floor, and the murals are incredible, and so much had happened there. Johnny Carson and Arturo Toscanini and the NBC Orchestra, and Saturday Night Live, of course, and Letterman, and all these people that you sort of felt influenced by and stood on the shoulders of. So it was incredible to be in that building and to get to, have this sort of ringside seat or sort of backstage-ish, like, access to Saturday Night Live was incredible. I will say that I didn't go as much as I kind of probably should have, partly because I think, I worked so much in that building all week, and the Conan job was really hard, and we had late hours. Like the idea of going in on a Saturday night was kind of like, oh, I don't know if I have the energy to be in that building, even to see something fun like Saturday Night Live. But when I did go, it was just so cool. And there were a lot of writers on our show, this whole Chicago world of writers, like Brian Stack and McCann and Tommy Blatcha and Andy and so on, who had lots of friends. And, we would met Tina Fey and later Amy Poehler and people like that, who were there. And then, I remember literally going out for drinks with a bunch of people, right, like during Will's first week, including Will, who I know very peripherally to this day. But it was just very, it was cool to be at the center of the universe in a way, which is what Saturday Night Live felt like every Saturday night, and still does, I think. And then, if you were really smart and lucky, you would plan your visits. We had to go visit our graphics department and review material sometimes, and they were up on a separate area, kind of across and above Saturday Night Live. So we had to cross through the 8H studio sometimes, which you weren't supposed to always do, but sometimes you could sneak and see a band rehearsing for the week, on Thursday afternoon and stuff. So it was pretty incredible.
When you were at Conan, one person that I always would tune in, no matter what, and there weren't a lot of these type of guests, was Norm Macdonald. He would either crush, once in a while he would just, completely fall on his face, but when he crushed, nobody crushed more than Norm. What was it like to be on the studio floor for that? Would you talk to him at all if you were a stand-up during the breaks at all, or backstage before the show? What was Norm? What was your impression of him?
I got to work with Norm before he was Norm, kind of. Before he was like famous. I think in 1988 or 89 at Catch a Rising Star in Cambridge. I middled for him. He headlined, and we all had seen him. He so immediately popped when he came on TV. So I think there was a show that George Schlatter produced. There was like a compilation of comedians, stand-up show. You may remember the name of it because I have a feeling you're the kind of guy who remembers all of that kind of stuff. But it was a compendium of clips, and a bunch of us had seen him. I think it aired in prime time or somewhere in late night or something. And so a bunch of us like, oh, that guy there's something different and funny and specific about him. So he was bringing in all these comedians from Boston, who were fans of comedy, who were showing up to see Norm. And I got to know him a little bit that week. Super nice guy, kind of aloof in his way. Like he sort of never knew if he was putting you on with some of his like bio material. Like, are you married? Or do you what exactly? Like he kind of felt like everything was a little bit of a bit, but then I was always so thrilled to see him. I'm not like great friends with him, but we would say hello when we were friendly. But I will say that one of the times I vividly remember is I was standing in the studio 10 feet away when he did his incredible Courtney Thorne Smith, chairman of the board, how do you spell bored, BORED riff with about Carrot Top, which was a sort of clippable late night moment to this day, and made him kind of legendary. And I also know that to the credit of Conan and Jeff Ross and Frank Smiley, who was the segment producer and really and Paula Davis, who were the lead people on getting comics on, they saw how brilliant he was, I think, even before Letterman did. So I think we did a lot, or I shouldn't say we, the show did a lot for Norm early on, is sort of making him like these ultimate talk show guests. And Conan it's one of those people that just killed Conan, tickled him so much. So he was so excited to have him on always.
Yeah, Conan did such a good job of pretending that he would be horrified by some of the outrageousness of Norm, but you could tell he was loving all of it. Norm told me once, he's like, when I do Letterman, because Letterman was his hero, he would just prepare every little set syllable he would say, and just, it was all this pressure. But he said when he would go on Conan, it's just like, I'm just going to show up and wing it. I mean, I don't know if that's true, if he completely winged it. I'm sure he sat down with a pre-interview, but just being that relaxed and being that comfortable, I don't know if he would have felt comfortable doing the same on Letterman in terms of some of the stuff, the risque stuff. I don't know if how that would have played.
I think that's true. I think Letterman didn't. I don't know Letterman at all, but he projected a vibe that wasn't something he was that comfortable with. A, B, huge audience difference in scope and scale, and then it's an 11:30 show versus 12:30. I mean, all the sort of obvious reasons. And then Conan is, I think personally is, had a sort of underdog, outsider status from being 12:30 and being Conan, and the tone of the show and his origin story in terms of getting the show and keeping the show and building this audience. So I think it was, I'm sure it was its own kind of pressure, because you wanted to do well, and the cool kids were watching Conan, so you wanted to do well in front of the cool kids. I'm sure if you're Norm, but there probably also was a vibe. But I think Andy helped, on that show enormously to create this sense of, it's just funny people sitting around. It didn't feel weird, I don't think, to be on that show. I was never a guest on the show, but I'm guessing it never felt weird, unless you were weird and made it weird, which people did.
Who did make it weird? Who?
Well, before I was there, famously, and Conan probably is tired of anybody ever talking about it, but Eartha Kitt did not understand who she was talking to. So there's a famously awkward interview with her. I remember Juliette Binoche felt like above it all, kind of, and he was a little bit like, what was that? And then, just my personal recollection of Bill Maher was kind of like sort of shat on the late night audience, the studio audience, and like, you people don't know anything kind of a thing. And Conan was I think Conan was pissed because he was defensive of his audience, and I think Bill sort of took the liberty. I mean, I don't know Conan was pissed, but I'm guessing he would have been, because he was taking a shot at his audience.
That was Bill Maher, you said?
Bill Maher did that, yeah. I remember. But I mean, Bill Maher was a really good guest and knew how to do the shows, but
you were there when there was a studio fire, and then you did the show at the skating rink. What all happened in terms of the timing?
That was a crazy day. I was there. I was head writer, and that was such an insane day, because there was a studio fire, and then we spent the first part of the morning. I think I went in early to work, because I think I can't remember exactly when the fire had happened, during the night, I think, but we drove out to CNBC headquarters in Secaucus, New Jersey, to think about doing the show out there. And that took us a couple hours in the morning before we decided to do the show outside that night. And I remember Samuel L. Jackson, I believe, was the guest.
Yes, and Catan.
Yeah. And it turned out great. It was one of those ones where, like, Conan is so funny, because I think he loves to be very prepared. And it's like he'd love to have. That's why I think it was one of the hallmarks of the show that Robert and Smigel and Conan really, held up at the beginning, was like, we're not making fun of doing a show. We're doing a show, and we're going to try to have the sketches work on their own and not be stuff that just is there for the host to make fun of. Having said that, and that's why he liked to be prepared, and he liked rehearsal, and he liked us to have good beginnings, middle, and ends to our sketches and to our bits. all that being said, like when he had his back against the wall and had to improvise and had to deal with like adversity, he was, of course, incredible. Maybe because he was so prepared, it made him more ready to be, loose.
You and Mike Sweeney started on the same day. Mike Sweeney took over the warm up from Joel Goddard, who had a tough
Mhm.
time with it. So he's said this before, and Mike really brought a great energy to the audience. Did Mike, to your knowledge, do a writer's packet, or was he just kind of hired on being funny? He was a really funny stand up, so I could see them bypassing the process. Obviously, you did a packet, which I'm going to ask you about in a little bit. But to
Yeah.
your knowledge, did he do a packet?
Well, it's so funny. I think Mike and I were friends before working there, and we were actually working side by side downtown at HBO Downtown Productions. He was the writer for Laura Keitlinger's show, a stand-up show called Stand Up, which was a clip show on Comedy Central that was, just clips of comedians. And I was the writer for Short Attention Span Theater, which was the show Mark Maron hosted that I think Jon Stewart had hosted a few years before, and then Mark S. Allen or whatever. And Mark, they kind of reimagined it with Mark as the host, and I got hired as the writer in like early '94, I think it was. And Mike Sweeney came in to write for Laura Keitlinger, who he was tight with, and he's so funny. And we were working like down the hall from each other, and I think we heard that there were a couple of openings because Louis C.K. was moving on, Dino Stamatopoulos was moving on, Marsh McCall was going to become the head writer. So we both applied. I think he did do a packet. I think he had an inside track because Conan thought he was funny and he'd done such a great job with the warm up. But he did, as far as I know, he did do a packet.
What was your packet like, if you remember? I remember Conan said one of your ideas, because it's a list of 2 pages of ideas. I believe it was a choir that beautiful music, but they were insulting Conan. But it was like, no, but listen to them, their voice. It's so
Well,
beautiful.
that bit was made my career on some level because it was a bit where basically it was an idea of like a barbershop quartet or a doo-wop singing band, like turned into a doo-wop thing. And Andy has found them. The premise is that Andy discovered them singing at a club late night in Times Square or something, and he thought it would be great to have them on the show. So he's invited, and Conan's like, that sounds great. And then they come out and they're singing these beautiful doo-wop melodies and harmonies and all that kind of stuff. But all the songs are about like what a big, pasty, weird, freaky guy Conan is, and like he's freckled and long-legged and a weirdo. And they would sing a verse, and Conan would be like, Andy, and Andy would be like, oh, don't even pay attention to the words. With this kind of music, it's just really about the harmonies and the melodies and how they interact. And it did really, really well. That bit. So I handed in my submission packet, and Louis C.K. was a friend of mine, saw that bit, and he goes, "We could do that bit. We need a bit for Thursday night." He hadn't left yet. He was still there. We need a bit like this week. Would you be okay with us doing that bit even before you get hired? And I was like, yeah. So they did that bit, and it was kind of like, you're going to get a job now, but they couldn't make it official. And then the bit did really well. And I believe Carol Leifer, who whenever I see her, I give her credit, was friends with Jeff Ross, the producer. And she called up like the next day and was like, yeah, it was a really funny bit on Conan last night where these doo-wop singers came out and shit all over Conan, and Andy booked them. And it was really funny. He's like, oh yeah, that's this guy we're probably going to hire as a writer, blah, blah, blah. And so I always give her credit too. And Louis, of course, like, was a friend and also did that for me, which was pretty awesome. But yeah, that was in my packet and was produced before I got there. The other one that was in my packet that we ended up doing later was a late night, was Conan's publicist, Ira.
Oh, I love that Smigel. Oh my goodness.
Smigel did the voice. Smigel knew about, I think, looked at the packets, even though he wasn't there anymore. He was leaving as head writer, but I think he looked at the packets and helped sign off on me. And so I think he remembered that bit. And maybe when Conan said, let's do that, or Marsh McCall said, let's do that. Maybe it was Marsh actually thought of Robert for the voice of it. And actually I'm trying to think, there may not even have been a character associated with it. It might have just been the idea that there was this publicist who was overcharging Conan, because whenever the words late night would appear, in an ad anywhere, he would send Conan a bill. So like, open late nightly specials for some restaurant in like Kenosha, Wisconsin. He goes, Conan, that's $250. That's excellent placement for your show. And like, on all these like vandalistic things that he had done to put Conan's name out there. He was all about getting Conan's name out there and charging him a premium fee for it. And Robert did a phone interview as Ira, calling up Conan to demand payment for these things.
It was so much funnier. And Smigel's hilarious on his own, but to do it with just his voice and just the phone. And I remember there was a riot and somebody held up a picture of Conan or something like that. But that they did that a few times.
He planted a picture of Conan, or he did bad photoshops. I think he had like a big state funeral or something in the Middle East or something, and had like a photo there where people rioting. Yeah, and he's like, look at this placement I got you, Conan.
Oh, I love that sketch. I love that bit. I was going to ask you, Wussy Wagon. Weren't you in the Wussy Wagon? And who came up with that? I just remember you in it. I thought at least once.
I think I was in it. I think that was an example of like the Wussy Wagon was a bunch of guys in suits, generally holding briefcases, kind of matching gray suits, being wheeled through the studio, crying and whining, in an enormous wagon that our incredible prop and construction department built for us. So I think the stagehands pulled through it, and I think it was a Brian McCann bit. It feels like a Brian McCann bit, and he was one of the lead wusses in the wagon, sort of in the front. But I think I was in it once or twice. And then I know that and you may remember this, one of our proudest moments was we got James Woods, who politically is not my favorite guy in the world, but was a good talk show guest, and he agreed to get in the Wussy Wagon and be hauled out of the studio, which was kind of a coup for us.
Yeah, when people do bits, especially people that are known for more drama. Greg Conan said once was not capable of writing a topical joke, but he would come up with all these brilliant ideas. Can you talk about Greg's contribution to Conan?
Yeah, he was not like some of the stuff that we would do at the top of the show that was kind of, the stuff you do to kind of turn the lights on and get the show going. And that Conan liked to do like desk piece type stuff, like actual items, or he was not as much that into. He hated celebrity related humor, so sort of topical jokes just didn't appeal to him. And he would shrug and kind of be like, I don't know how to write those, and I don't really want to write those. But then he would like sit on, not have anything on the show for 2 weeks, and then have this brilliantly well-produced bit that was sort of signature and landmark, whether it was, the Song Remains the Same parody, or the crazy bit he did with Rip Taylor and William the Refrigerator Perry that I think Frank Smiley helped with too. And so he was one of those guys who kept the spirit, I think the kind of renegade bananas spirit of late night alive, and he was super valuable. But I think he also probably got a little frustrated at times with things, because it was maybe he was like, oh man, I don't want to do celebrity tombstones again, which I understand, even though those sometimes gave you great jokes.
I was gonna ask, when Johnny Carson didn't like what the writers had, it was Stump the Band or Blue Cards. It was initially Blue Cards, and if he didn't like the Blue Cards, it was Stump the Band. And I was going to ask if there was ever an issue with the writing. Did Conan say we're doing plastic surgery, or we're doing If They Made It? Because they're both, for me at least, for writers, it's like a day off, and it was not a day off for Blue Cards. That was very hard. For Stump the Band, it would have been for the writers, but was that ever a thing? I mean, it's just it seemed like it probably wouldn't have taken that much from a comedy writer standpoint.
Well, that was the tricky thing. It wouldn't take that much from the writer's standpoint, but you couldn't produce it fast enough to be like an emergency desk bit. If the desk bit was a complete disaster. So generally, what I tried to do was give Conan enough options. Like if it's a desk bit that is like a bunch of things that he's holding up and talking about and whatever, like, celebrity resumes, or even staring contests, like a bit like that, have ones that he could cut that would be like, that's just not as good. So you felt like you had some editorial leeway. But there was like, it would be easy enough for maybe the writers to brainstorm and come up with a celebrity, before if they made it or whatever, or celebrity plastic surgery or whatever. But that was a super time consuming for the graphics department. We had an incredible graphic artist named Kevin Frank. And then Ann Albacali and Marty Geller were also in that department. Marty was great, but Kevin was like really brilliantly talented, but he couldn't only, what looked easy from a writing perspective and kind of was day off-ish was not easy from a production standpoint. So we had to be careful. And the idea of like having something under wraps in the freezer to take out in case of emergency, it always was much more seat of the pants than that. Honestly, the thing we could do probably spur of the moment, and even this took a lot out of people, was to do a clutch cargo moving lips thing, which you could the night before go like, okay, the desk piece isn't going to be ready for tomorrow, and something just happened with Clinton and the president of Ireland or whatever, so let's do a clutch cargo thing. And those you could write the night before in the morning of, even though it was hectic.
How much pressure was it 9 months into the job when you find out that you're going to be head writer? This is not something you lobbied for. I believe Marsh McCall was out. I don't know if he was sick or he missed something, and they were doing it was a huge deal because weren't they were doing a show where were they on a boat? Was it the Circle Line? I forget what it was, but they were doing a big show, and Marsh wasn't there as the head writer, and you had only been there, I don't know, was it 9 months, and they had you just step up. What was that like, and what was that pressure?
What happened was Marsh was still the head writer. That was the summer of '95, and Marsh was the head writer, but he got sick. And that was an enormous, crazy undertaking to do this show on the Circle Line, basically taping it at 5 and then getting it produced and delivered in time to air that night. Maybe we taped it a little earlier in the day, but it was an enormous, crazy, stupid undertaking with, lots of fun, dumb bits, and some of which were pre-taped and some of which were live. And I think Marsh was kind of busy trying to get other episodes of the show produced that week. And then I think actually got sick on the day or the day before. So I really did. And I think I did step up and just sort of take on some more responsibility and helped deliver the show and edit it and tried to be a voice of calm. And even though I was probably freaking out a little bit, and I think I got some credit from Conan and Jeff of like good in a crisis, good under
Can you hear me?
pressure, pulled it together a little bit. And I think it was one of the reasons, I think a couple months later when Marsh left, that they asked me to be the head writer that September is when I stepped in. But it was really hard. That job, I will say, I caught the biggest break of the first few head writers, is the show went from 5 nights a week to 4 nights a week in December of 1995. And those first 3 months of 5 shows a week were really hard. And the fact that Marsh had done that and then Robert had done that before him, I don't know how they did it.
Yeah, 5 nights a week is brutal. Like Colbert and Letterman would do 2 shows on certain days, and you could kind of at least have a day off, even though those would be very intense Thursdays. But yeah, that's great that you went down to 4, and then that would give you that Mondays to do remotes or just kind of catch up.
That's right. We would do remotes on Mondays or just get it a little bit ahead on the writing for the week. It made a huge difference. And being able to leave on Friday after a hard week and know that you weren't taping a show on Monday made a huge difference. It was a massive lifesaver break that happened. And it was amazing too, because they aired a rerun on Monday night, and the writers got paid a little bit more because they got a rerun aired, and they get a small residual for a re-aired. So it was like this double thing of like, oh, we're getting a little more breathing room and you're going to get a teeny bit more money. It was like this win-win for us. But yeah, we recorded 2 shows a few times for other reasons, I think, maybe travel or something that Conan was doing. And then a weird fun show that we always recorded early every year was we usually record a show on Thanksgiving Day, but we would shoot it at like, noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon maybe, and be done. And we would I remember they would always provide catered Thanksgiving dinner for everybody.
That's fun that you got to do that. I was going to ask, when you were a head writer of Conan, it was only 9 months in that you got the gig, which is unbelievable. What was the best part of being head writer, and then your least favorite part about being head writer?
Wow, great question. Obviously it was really fun to I had some skills, I think, and some past experiences, like sort of leading a creative team a little bit or leading a team in stuff I'd done in college, in my college radio station, and then in my sketch group in Boston that I was in. Um, I was one of the sort of I was one of the producers of it, so I kind of took on extra responsibility. So I've always kind of gravitated toward like how can we figure this out together, and so I felt useful in that regard. And obviously, creatively, it was great to be able to, as much as you could on a daily show that was like a runaway train at all times, to sort of shape like, oh, this is something we can plan to do down the road, and we can aspire to do something more ambitious, like time travel shows for a week, or sending Conan or Andy on a big remote, or something for a holiday special, like a Thanksgiving sketch for a Thanksgiving Day episode. And then I liked, kind of being able to be the person sitting with Conan and Jeff Ross, the producer, really figuring out, being let in on some of like the sort of strategic show business conversations. Like we're thinking about traveling the show here and there, and being a part of that and being included in that. And then just, getting to really work even more closely with Conan, and even more closely with every single writer. And then, honestly too, it was just a nice professional milestone to get trusted with that, and really fun. The least favorite part of it was, there is an endless, it is like the post office in a way, doing a daily show like that, and which is both exciting because you can always back out there and like fix if a sketch didn't go great, or a desk piece didn't play, or you just didn't feel like you nailed it. You could always go like, well, let's, it's like a 162 game season in baseball. Like, let's flush that game down the toilet and get to the next day and try to do better tomorrow. The hours were really long. I definitely lost sleep over it because you would take a long time to decompress when you got home. We'd have 10, 12-hour days a lot. And so I would be, not able to kind of decompress from it or come down from it sometimes.
I will say, as head writer, one amazing thing being at Conan is there wasn't a lot of turnover in terms of the writers. There are some late night shows where the head writer is very, it seems like almost constantly letting go of people that are they think aren't pulling their weight. Did you ever have to do that, or was it very, very few, if I'm guessing, when you're head writer?
Yeah, there was enough natural attrition, I think, when I was there, that it didn't ever feel like we were getting stale. So there was never a need of like, oh, let's turn this over because we're stuck or we're whatever. Like, people, a little bit into it were like, I think Ned Goldreyer and Mike Stoyanov wanted to go and do other things back in LA, and Dave Reynolds had moved on. I think he moved on before I took over as head writer, but so there had been some turnover. So I inherited we hired a few new people, obviously, and then inherited kind of a stable staff. And it was a good place to work. As hard as it was exciting, and we felt like we were doing something cool and getting into a groove with it. I did have to let a few people go, which was not really fun. A couple people who just honestly, I think one really who especially just good submission and then never really figured out how to be productive enough on a daily level, or even like we could tolerate sometimes people who were, or not tolerate, but like managed to integrate into the overall thing, people who weren't coming up with a daily thing, but then had the brilliant show defining character. Like, this is very much a late night bit. And it would happen once every 10 days or 2 weeks, but oh boy, was it great. And there were some writers like that, that we actually loved, but then there were people who neither didn't do that and then didn't do anything in terms of really bringing it. But it didn't happen much.
I heard you talk once, and you said that there were very few writers at Conan that could write every type of joke.
Yeah.
Can you explain that to people?
Well, the show was a little bit divided into monologue, was definitely divided into monologue writers and sketch writers. And then even with that, and so the monologue writers, when I was there, was like mostly Janine DiTullio, Brian Kiley, Chuck Sklar, Tom Agna, Chris Albers. They were really dedicated to just writing the monologue jokes. They didn't contribute that much in the terms of the sketch writing. And then even within the sketch writers, there were people who could write like really good single year 2000 jokes, which were kind of like a version of monologue jokes, but and they could do that. And they also were great at writing like the weird sketch things and the character driven stuff. And then I think of a writer like Brian Stack, who was amazing, was so much more inventive as a sketch writer and as a bit writer, and a character writer, like these incredible characters that he gave birth to. Whereas there were some people who would like, what's the funniest visual thing that we could do? And sometimes that would be more slapstick or just a funny visual, graphics piece that we would design, or a funny, quick popping, funny, gross out thing in a staring contest or a satellite TV. There were people who were better. I mean, everybody could do everything, but there were some people who definitely were better at like Brian Stack used to write like miniature little plays almost, like with these characters, and he only did more of that even after I left as head writer. Some of his most memorable stuff, like The Interrupter or Hannigan, this traveling salesman, those were after I left. He was just starting to get into that groove when I was there.
I heard Conan speak once, and you were with him, and he said that I think it was Greg Cohen could not write a topical joke if you put a gun to his head.
Greg Cohen, that was not his strength, and he was who I was really talking about when I said like a daily topical joke about a celebrity or a political joke in a Clutch Cargo moving lips thing with Bill Clinton or Bob Dole. He just wasn't interested in it. It wasn't. I think he could have written them. It just didn't interest him, and he was really amazingly frank and kind of refreshing, because he was like, "Yeah, I don't really like that kind of stuff, and I don't really get it, and I don't really do it, so whatever." And then he would come up with the weirdest,
Grady, The Search for Grady.
The Search for Grady was him, or we never actually the Refrigerator Perry, Rip Taylor reunion piece or whatever was kind of a lot of Greg, or the Song Remains the Same parody we did, where Conan, Andy, Max, and Oldie and Bobby Bowman are all different characters from the Led Zeppelin concert movie, that was epic. That was Greg Cohen. Like, he was going to come up with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was some of my favorite things. Colin Jost wrote in his book, he said when as head writer at Saturday Night Live, you would meet with these prospective people, they had good packets, or you would hear good things. And he said almost every year there would be writers that would show up either drunk or they were just too nervous and they would crumble during the interview process. Did you ever, as head writer, witness any of these? Did you have experiences like that where their packet was solid and you met with them and you're like, I can't hire them based on it just wouldn't be a good fit?
No. Actually, no, because I kind of felt like if we liked the packet enough, even if they were like shy or introverted, or, I mean, look, all writers are kind of nerds and have some degree of social anxiety and awkwardness. Like, otherwise we kind of wouldn't do what we do. So I think we were able to kind of integrate that, and usually maybe there was an example of somebody I met who I just didn't get a vibe from, and then didn't bring that person further in the process or introduce them to Conan or whatever. But no, we didn't. Okay. I didn't have that experience. No, I have there's a really funny guy named Dave King, who the flip side of it was, and this didn't keep him from getting the job, but I did remember interviewing Dave King, who's gone on to a great career in LA. And he was such a sweetheart, because he didn't know what he was supposed to do in a job interview. And he showed up for a job as a writer at Conan in a suit, I'm pretty sure, and a tie, which was not it was, t-shirts and jeans kind of a place, totally, and super informal. And he sort of felt like, well, I'm going for a job interview. I should clean this up. And when I see him, he's written for Parks and Rec and all these great shows. He's somebody I will tease, and he will remind me that he wore a tie to his Conan interview.
I'm only bringing this up because I've heard you talk about it, and you wrote a print piece about it. You wrote for Jon Stewart's. It was
Yeah.
either his MTV show or the Paramount syndicated version. I don't know which one. But why did Jon Stewart let you go? You mentioned he fired you. Was it because it wasn't a fit personally, or was it the jokes, that the material he just didn't think was a fit? Was it creative or was it behavioral?
It wasn't behavioral, but it was kind of on me. So that I was on the MTV Jon Stewart show, and my sense of what happened is, I think John. It was the very first series that we did on MTV, first batch of shows, which would have been airing in the fall of 1993, I believe. And John had knew me from stand up, and he had also seen the sketch group I was in and really liked it. The sketch group I was in with David Cross and all these really funny people, Paul Kozlowski and Lauren Dombrowski and so on. And he was like, oh yeah. And then somebody recommended me to that job. Also, my friend John Ross was put in my word for me. So I put together a submission. It was good. And I think John a little bit was like starting out his show and sort of had like, I need somebody who's going to fix all my problems. Because I remember, I think one of the producers, Elise Roth, was like, John really likes you and you have a chance to make a big impact here. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I kind of was just a guy, and I was funny and I pitched some funny stuff. The sensibility might have been a little bit different. You know, I remember like there were bits that were kind of driven more almost as like less by comedy and more like, oh, there's a guy we found who will eat anything, so let's have him eat hair from a shower drain or something like that. Like it was more like kind of whoa kind of stuff. It wasn't necessarily even coming from the comedy writer side of things, but more like, or the writer side, but more like the what's a weird thing we could put on the air. That wasn't totally my sensibility. And then I also think, honestly, and this is where I really put it on me, I kind of immediately sort of said like, okay, I got this job. John thinks I'm funny. These writers here also seem to think I'm funny. I'm just going to settle in and take my time and make, figure it out. And it's like, you don't have time to figure it out. You got to come in hard and hit the ground running and be pitching hard and really be not obnoxious, but ambitious and not push, but work your ass off. And I think I kind of came in and was like, let me figure this out a little bit and I'll take my time. And it's like, there is no time, because it was also a very short, we did like 22 shows. And then the next cycle, we stopped production, took 2 months off, and we're going to do another cycle. And that's what I was not asked back for. So I put it on me a little bit of like, and I've never made that mistake again. Like you kind of gotta, if you get an opportunity, you got to go hard.
During your time at Conan as head writer, did you have any interaction with Lorne Michaels? Did he have any notes whatsoever during your time there?
No, I think not really. I had two real interactions with Lorne. One is not long after I became the head writer, he wanted to meet me. And so I had a meeting in his office, which was cool. And he kind of just wanted to have a kind of global discussion of what, he's like, I'm not going to try to do my Lorne impression as everybody does, but he was like, what's the character of Conan? I remember him saying like, who do you feel you're writing for? I think he was trying to like give me a state of the show address a little bit and what he sort of thought. But by the time I had taken over as head writer, the show was really starting to turn the corner and gain some popularity. And I think Lorne was more like, we got something here. I'm going to leave Jeff Ross and Conan and everybody and Robert Smigel before me and Marsh and everybody before me to figure it out. It's kind of starting to work. The early days of like, what are we doing? And him probably getting pressure from the network of like, you chose this guy and we're not sure it's working, et cetera, which I don't even know that all that much about. It was past that. So it was kind of like, I think Lorne, in that Lorne way, kind of trying to strategize about like, where do we go from here? And what do you think? And I think he was testing me and sounding me out. It was a really actually nice meeting. He's a super smart guy. And then the other time I really dealt with him, which was cool, was Conan was being inducted or honored at the American Museum of the Moving Image or whatever it is in Astoria, Queens, like the motion picture museum out there. there's a motion picture thing, and Lorne had remarks to make that he needed to make. So I think Jeff Ross suggested that I kind of be a sounding board for Lorne and help him shape what he said about Conan. So it was basically I was like helping him to write his remarks for that, which was interesting. And that was right after I'd left as head writer, so I wasn't really working for him anymore. I was starting to develop shows, but I had a little time on my hands. So that was the most time I actually spent talking to him, was over the course of a few evenings. We jumped on the phone and sort of went through his speech, kind of.
That's very, very cool. What was that experience like, being on the phone with Lorne and editing material and having that with him?
It was cool. Like it was interesting to see him going back to his roots. First of all, he felt so personally close to Conan. He did, and so responsible and sort of paternal, I think, about Conan's success, that he wanted to say the right thing and strike the right tone. I remember him, talking about how he hired Conan and he had little joke insults in there. I think one of the jokes was like, he met Greg Daniels and Conan, who were writing partners, and he thought, Greg was super smart and funny, and Conan was tall. Like he had some jokes like that. And so it was fun to see him, and I helped him with some jokes like that. It was fun to see him kind of work through his feelings about Conan. And also, he was a comedy writer, so to see him kind of, after not doing that kind of thing, feel like he needed to put something down on paper that had some jokes that were sort of suitable for the occasion, because Conan's one of the funniest human beings in the world ever, and I think Lorne knows that. So he wanted to do right by him, but there was an element of, it was actually kind of endearing, like, is this good enough? Kind of, that he was asking me a little bit as like to help him, like make sure I want to make it good. So I kind of loved how much he wanted to get it right.
Yeah, that says a lot about him. Were there any times when you were at Conan where they had to stop taping that you remember, either disasters? I mean, back then they really tried to treat it like it was in real time, and it was rare that it would stop.
The only time I remember was actually, yes, somebody had a reaction to the lights in the studio, like those flashing lights. You get that warning now. I think.
Yes.
I don't think we did that, or maybe we did, and the person probably thought they could handle it, and somebody had a seizure, and we had to stop tape and go back to like sort of. I think Conan hadn't even gotten a joke out or realized something was wrong or going on as he was about to start the monologue. So that was the only time we ever did a pickup with the audience there, and started the show over.
Who were some people, if there were any celebrities that were not happy with jokes that were made? I know at one point Kelsey Grammer was upset at a joke. I know a daytime personality personally called Conan up, and I think Michael Bolton had some issue with one of the jokes. Were there any that you recall that were not happy with jokes when you were there and made that either privately reached out to the show or publicly were not thrilled?
I don't remember too much. I remember the incidents you were talking about. I think I do remember one time, right? I think it was actually like my last week as head writer. There was a SAG commercial writer strike that was going on, where the Screen Actors Guild specifically were having a strike about the SAG contract for commercial acting, and so they were protesting. They were picketing major producers of commercials and I think advertising agencies, anybody who was a signatory to the commercials agreement. And we had a funny bit about it that Kevin Dorff was one of the writers, who I think I had hired right before I left, had written, and he was performing in it, I think, where it was basically, quickly I'll sell it, was like Conan said, we use a lot of actors on the show and they're struggling because of the strike. A lot of them make a living doing commercials and they can't act in commercials because they're on strike right now. So we're going to have an actor come on and tell his story, and he's going to get a payment. This will help him get paid, but he's going to get a payment. So this Kevin Dorff comes out, I believe, and pretends to be an actor and says like, yeah, it's really hard to put food on the table. I can't afford groceries because of this strike. And, I come home and I just wish there was like, I could bring groceries home for my family, like a delicious box of Triscuits. and he holds up a box of Triscuits. And it was a funny, like, oh, the actor is like getting paid under the table to do, that was the premise of the thing. And he's sneaking in a commercial. Tim Robbins was a guest on the show that day. And I can see why he did this, but he was very active in the Screen Actors Guild and active in that strike. I think I actually ended up going to because I was in the Screen Actors Guild too. I think I'd gone to some organizational meeting that he spoke at or something. I can't remember. But I was actually respectful of the strike because I had done a lot of commercials as a performer. And I was like, oh, I think we're publicizing the strike and whatever. And he was like, no, you are giving basically a free commercial to Triscuits. And so he threatened to not, he was the first guest on the show and he saw the sketch, like he just happened to pick it up, like it was on the page desk outside the studio. We would leave copies of the sketch for anybody who needed to like last minute look at it, or one of the actors forgot his sketch or whatever. So we had copies of it on the page desk outside the studio. He was waiting. It was in the afternoon and he sees this and goes, you can't do this sketch. And he like asked to talk to whoever was in charge. And I'm negotiating with Tim Robbins, who I happen to like quite a bit as an actor. And I'm like sort of almost getting into an argument with him, making this point that like, no, we are actually, if anything, bringing some exposure to this strike and public, and that was kind of our intent, was not to give Triscuits a free ride, Nabisco, whoever. And he was like, no, you can't do this. I'll walk off. So we changed, like we had enough time to, he found a beer, I think it was. It might've been like Sierra Nevada or Anchor Steam. I think it was Anchor Steam, who had signed a separate agreement to honor the new agreement of SAG. He like called the SAG office, Screen Actors Guild office, and got them to say like, are there any advertisers who are legitimately already obeying by what the rules are going to be in this new contract negotiation? And it was Anchor Steam beer, I think. And so we changed it from Triscuits and had to rewrite the sketch so that the Kevin Dorff, the actor playing the actor, could hold up a six-pack of Anchor Steam. It wasn't as good because it wasn't as famous a brand. It was much more fun to be able to say Triscuits. So I think it made the sketch worse, but it made Tim Robbins not walk off our show.
That's such a Larry Sanders type moment show.
I literally think it might have been my last day, like September of 2000, I think it was. Yeah.
I do want to say he's a very nice man. I've met him a couple times, at least when I've met him.
Yeah, he was super nice. And I think I could see why he took that position. And I think he didn't want to have to figure it out. He was just like, can't you just change this? He used his power as the first guest of the show, and it was Tim Robbins. It was a good guest for us to have. He didn't reference it on air, and I think he was actually happy about the solution because we ended up touting an advertiser who had already signed the contract, basically. So it worked out, but to me, it was a little less funny, and I did feel like, I didn't really feel heard on my point that we're actually overall greater good publicizing the plight of the screen actors, the commercial actors.
Were there any guests that you got booked that you pitched either to Jim Pitt for music or stand-up comedians or just anybody that you thought would be good for the show that you got booked during your time at Conan?
Not really. I stayed out of that lane. I think there were other writers who had been in the stand-up trenches more, or some of our monologue writers who probably pitched some people to Paula Davis and Frank Smiley to book. Jim Pitt was actually, he was so tapped in. I think he was tough to pitch to in terms of like somebody I'd like. If you pitch somebody, he'd be like, yeah, nobody knows them, or they don't have a record out currently, or the dates aren't going to work out. So I didn't ever have any luck with that. I didn't try that often.
When you became head writer after 9 months, was there anything that Conan said we want to do differently than Marsh did? Was there anything specific that we want to not do this and try it this way?
No, that was not said to me. I think that Conan was, I had heard him talk about what stuff he was responding to more than other things, just being on the staff. I remember specifically, like I remember him teasing us once, like, oh, okay, let's walk in. Oh, let's talk to the curtain today. And we're going to put an animated mouth on the curtain. And the curtain is going to talk about what it feels like when it gets pulled back. It's for the first guest to walk out, and he was like teasing us for sort of the arbitrary stuff that we would do. And he was that was a favorite Conan word of that he was always a little bit leery of stuff that was not grounded in like a sort of smart through line or had a kind of organic reason. Like he was like, he would be like, "Oh, look, the mirror, the cushion on the couch is just going to start, talking or whatever." And then the hilarious thing is, some of the best bits were when, like, Brian McCann put a FedEx packet on the top of his head and started walking around the writer's office blessing people as if he was the FedEx Pope, because it looked like a papal mitre, a Pope hat, and could not be more arbitrary. And Conan got really good, I think, and we got really good about like bottling up where we would just be random and arbitrary. So like we would do like new characters for spring 2000, whatever it was, spring 1998. And that bit allowed us to do these kind of weirdo, arbitrary bits within an overall desk piece. And it gave Conan the opportunity to cut one or two of them if he felt they were too arbitrary. Similarly, we do the satellite channels. It was a chance to kind of do a desk piece that had numerous discrete pieces of comedy in it. Some of them would be super weird little pieces of comedy, and Conan could pick or choose whether he had the stomach for how weird it was. And to his credit, he mostly let us do the weird stuff, and he realized that was the papal FedEx hat, the FedEx Pope, which he would have said, "Oh my God." So let me guess, McCann put a FedEx box on his head and started blessing people around the office. Exactly. That's
Funny
exactly what happened. So he was just, I think, always a little bit like, because he was such a smart writer, like, how can we make it feel earned and organic and not just random, like two weird ideas put together,
Was there anything, looking back, in terms of the culture being different that did well, or that you put on Conan's show looking back, that today probably you wouldn't be able to do?
Yeah.
We don't have to get specific, but there were just some things that you can think about.
There was, even within a world of being kind of intelligent and weird and smart, there was stuff that was probably broier than I would want to have be out there now, I think, and a little bit like, like fast and loose with groups that are would not be happy. You know what I mean? I think just to kind of, it was of that time a little bit. I think we kind of pushed that in some ways that was smart and refreshing, and in some ways that was like, oh, I wouldn't do that now. But I feel that way. I mean, I feel that way about stuff I did 5 years ago. Like, everything's changing, and
Everything does, yeah.
You got to push back and go like, well, this is still funny, right? And then other times you kind of go like, yeah, can we do this and be just as funny without like shitting on somebody or making somebody feel less than?
I had a day job at Letterman at the CBS version in the late 90s, and the audience was always an issue with the show, in terms of Dave had a really tough time when the audience wasn't great, and it would happen, at least it seemed like once a week or maybe every other week. And I remember talking to you about the audiences, and I know that every show struggles with audiences a little bit, but I remember talking to you about it, and it was one of those things. I remember you telling me that you didn't want too many college kids in the audience. They were good, but too many. But what was your struggle with the audience, if any? Did you have trouble with audiences at all at Conan's show?
We really didn't, because especially in the time that I was there, I think it went from like people not knowing what they were showing up for and being sort of pulled into like, who is this guy? This is early on, even before I was there, like being pulled into like, oh, this is the Letterman replacement that's on at 12:30, to pretty rapidly, as Conan found his legs and the show found its voice, the audience is really wanting to be there. I think he did like a little bit of, and I think we all did appreciate a little bit of like, it's nice to have all the super hardcore rabid fan, major fangirling people there who just were fanboys and girls of the show. But it could be alienating. Sometimes you get a little bit like too much wild, crazy screaming. I find this from the studio audience is tiresome at home to watch.
Letterman hated it. Letterman hated when they would clap too much.
Yeah.
And when the whole woohoo.
I think we
thing.
kind of, I think Conan liked enthusiasm and liked appreciation, but there's a level of like, I always felt like it doesn't feel as good at home. like it might feel good in the moment, but it's a little bit tiring or tiresome to experience as a home viewer. So I kind of was like getting the audience too whipped into a frenzy, I think was not necessarily. And then sometimes you had like subtler jokes, that would be a little weirder or quieter and maybe, but would play well at home. You would think that, there's the tyranny of the studio audience a little bit that you have to balance, I think, on a live show with an audience that is rabidly excited to be there, but also it is a TV show for people at home and they're watching, they're trying to chill out. They want to laugh, but they also maybe want to just relax.
Almost every show I've worked on, there's been at least one or two strange intern stories. Nothing scandalous, but just weird behavior. I know Larry Sanders did an episode, The Weird Intern. Is there a story or two, intern story of Conan that stands out?
Oh, that's a good question. The only thing I wish that, Ellie Bransick was one of our writers, and she came up with the idea because we just had this flood of interns every semester. That was a semester-long thing, then the summer. So it was really 3 cycles of interns every year. And we liked our interns, and they were the people who just did a ton of stuff, and they were in bits, and they gave a kind of fun energy, and you could test jokes on them, and sometimes we would throw them into bits. And that was awesome. And we didn't realize how many of them were going to turn out to be like major players in the industry later, which was kind of funny. But Ellie was great. She was like, we have these people, and some of them were kind of odd, right? So but both the odd ones and the great ones, you kind of wanted to remember them. So she started making them do a Polaroid, almost like a camp counselor kind of a thing. And we had a book of the intern's book. So we could go like, who was that intern we had 2 summers ago who could never, always screwed up the dinner order, but then also was kind of like, a little bit like pitching us, trying to like get on the show or talk about whatever, or or was weirdly hanging around the band too much or something. And there were those things. Or who was awesome and really great and blah, 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 blah. And so we had this literally like a big loose leaf binder with Polaroids of people. That would be so cool to see now, because you would see John Krasinski and Mindy Kaling and Vanessa Bayer and Angela Kinsey. And I think it happened after Angela was there because she was there before I was there. But like people who have gone on to do cool stuff in our business would have been in that intern book. So we didn't have like, and actually I think interestingly, we didn't overly use interns in bits. I think that happened more after I was there, because one of the things that I think Robert and Marsh did in the early, and Conan early in the sort of comedy of it, was we didn't do as much with staff, partly because Letterman had already done so much of that. And I think we were more like, let's cast an actor, which was good for the actors and sketch performers in New York City. Conan later, I think, as he felt like he needed to differentiate himself less from what Dave was doing, because Conan was Conan and doing his own thing. That's why you had so many great, the Jordan stuff, Schlansky stuff happened after really my time there. And, the funny stuff with him talking to the interns, he did more of that after my time there, as he felt less like he was, I think, infringing on Dave's territory. And maybe it was because Dave was doing less of it too at that point and wasn't interacting with people in that same way. So I think Conan, which is amazing because so many, so much funny stuff, like even his relationship with Sona now on the podcast, I don't think he would have done that as much back in the day. We would have had an actor playing his assistant as opposed to the hilarious Sona, who is his, former assistant at this point, but hilarious sidekick.
No, that's a really good point. Were you the head writer that started this, or maybe it was with Marsh, where it seemed like for most of the writers they would have to do numerous packets to get hired? Is that a myth, or was that the truth? Was there anybody that on one packet when you were there were getting hired? It seemed the people that I would talk to that were getting hired would be like, I had to do 3 packets over a year, and it was this thing that just kept going. Is that a myth, or is there truth in that?
I think that's a little bit of a myth. I think that maybe we were interested. What could have happened is somebody got close but didn't make the cut, and we hired somebody else. Tommy Blatcher got the job, or Brian McCann got the job. And then it was like, but they were good. And we said, like, take another shot at it. And we looked at another packet, and maybe they got hired or maybe they didn't. So when we had the next time we had an opening, I don't think we were like made people do multiple revisions of one packet to get hired. And I think mostly if you could pop like Greg Cohen, nobody really knew him. Somebody from Chicago knew. I think he worked at the box office at Second City or something. But his packet just came in, and I think we hired him off that first packet in a meeting.
He didn't have an agent or anything. It was just
no. Most people did not. Most people got their managers after and agents after they started the show. So we were looking at submissions for the show. I think they had to sign a release that Broadway Video or that NBC let us sign, because we were looking at mostly unsigned people. Unsigned meaning unrepresented people. I had a manager, but a lot of people didn't have anything coming into it.
If Netflix existed back in the day, your show with Todd Barry would have been a special and would have been. People would have been quoting it. I mean, I saw it at UCB once or twice, and it was so funny. Can you talk about your show with Todd Barry and how much of it was scripted versus ad-lib? But the two-person comedy thing, I mean, you guys nailed it.
Oh, well, that's super kind.
It's the truth.
And I love that you remember that. So those started at Rebar, which was the bar on 8th Avenue in Chelsea. And then, but that scene mostly shifted over Rebar at Luna Lounge, which was down on Ludlow Street. And we started doing those in like 90. I moved here in 93. So late 93, 94 probably. Todd and I started doing that. Basically just started me being sort of the straight man and talking to Todd, who was this kind of oddball. And as we learned more and more, as I went through it, like often I would just discover weirder and weirder stuff about him, and we would just get hung up on little language stuff. It's very hard to describe. We ended up did a bunch of these monologues at the alt comedy scene, and then worked with Matt Besser from UCB to as a director. We thought he would be a good person to help us shape it. He was a fan of it, and we turned it into a show called Sidecarring. And it was this image of me, like I'm on a motorcycle, and just below me on this graphic that was on the little postcard art for it was Todd as if he was riding in a motorcycle sidecar. But the idea was I was kind of this like thoughtful, straight person, friend of Todd's, but kind of talked to him, and he just gets weirder and weirder. And eventually the stuff impacts back on me. We are still really good friends, and we've actually talked about trying to do some of it again. We ended up taking to the Aspen Comedy Festival. We did a version of it when the Daily Show was trying to figure out what they were doing. Early when Craig Kilborn was the host. They liked it. The folks there, I think Madeline and Elise and I think Stuart Bailey was working with them, and they liked it. And so we shot something for them, but they ended up calling it like, Musings of the Modern Man or something like that, and cutting it too tightly, and it didn't have the same feel. So it didn't work in the little bit we ever did it on TV, but we did do it at the Aspen Comedy Festival, and it was cool. It was a fun dynamic. It's hard to describe.
Does any footage exist, or any audio, or any visual?
I don't think there's a great video recording of it, but there are some bits that we recorded that are pretty funny that he played for me recently.
And you would kill. How much of it was written word by word versus improv?
We would work it out ahead of time, like the weekend before, like Monday night at Luna, and then Sidecarring was pretty scripted, but we would find new things on stage as we did it.
Oh, it was so funny. What are one of your two favorite Luna Lounge memories? It's unbelievable the amount of talent that was there, that was starting out, that has exploded, that are A-list now. But what stands out, if there were any memories looking back, or performances?
I'll be honest. I think the bulk of us doing that was when I was head writer at Conan. Was really we hit our stride doing them in 95 and 96. And I think we took that show to Aspen in 97. And for me, it was a creative release, a way of just keeping my hand in performing a little bit. And I think I mostly was not in the room when other stuff was up because I was nervously pacing. So I didn't watch that many shows. I do remember Marin coming in, and some people like Dave Attell didn't come there that often, even though he's a genius, because he was like, I'm gonna fucking kill in comedy clubs. I don't need this alt comedy shit. But like seeing early, seeing UCB people come through there was incredible.
Galifianakis, when he couldn't get booked on a late night show, nobody would book Zach Galifianakis, and he would destroy.
Yeah.
It was fun to look back.
Yeah, I think of Louis and Mark Maron and Janine Garofalo coming through and just trying material, and then I think Todd and I, we would, John Benjamin and stuff would come through. The other place that captured a little bit the vibe of that was a little later and did cool stuff was Stella.
Yes, that was hard to get in. That was very hard to get tickets.
Downstairs at Time Cafe, was one place that they did it, and I also did something with them somewhere else. But or I did a show that Jackie Hoffman was that I did occasionally. I did a funny, weird thing with John Benjamin that we did as part of Stella sometimes. I think Todd Barry and I did Stella sometimes too.
Last question. What was your last day like at Conan? Was it a relief that the pressure was off? Was it sad? Were you excited? What was that like? They gave you an on-camera tribute at the end. They showed you.
Did they? I forgot that. I think they did. Yeah. So. It was sad. I mean, it was a relief. It was such a hard job, and I was ready to go. And I was getting a little bit of pressure. I'd already made a deal with NBC at that point to start to develop other things. So there's a world in which I delayed having to go do that into the world of half hours as long as I could. But it was time, because I think my last day was around September of 2000. And I had to kind of come up with something quickly to get ready to pitch for that development cycle, because they were paying me. And so you pitch in the fall at the latest and try to get something and then write something. And so I wrote something, in the first 3 or 4 months after I left. And that was even late. Sometimes people would sell their shows over the summer before for the development for a half hour for the following year. I remember, I don't remember too many specifics of it other than it was moving, and I was, it felt like this was a part of my life. I'm glad I left. And, my manager a long time ago said, you don't want to stay at the party too long on a show like that. And yet I look at what somebody like Mike Sweeney, who did stay for a long time, or Matt O'Brien as head writers, were able to accomplish in the different iterations of what Conan eventually did. I think I would have probably gotten stale between 2000 and 2009 when Conan left to do The Tonight Show. It would have been too much. But Mike Sweeney coming in after me was able to do amazing things with Late Night, and the staff was incredible, and Conan just got better and better. And Andy leaving, which I didn't have to live with for very long. He had left only a little bit before I left. That, I think made Conan in some ways stronger. And then coming back out in 2009 and reuniting with Andy was amazing. And The Tonight Show was this incredible saga that I always felt a little bit on the outside of. So part of me has, and I'm still tight with Conan. I talk to a lot of the folks over there, and it's such a part of me, and I love all of them and see them when I can. But I did weirdly only, participate in the first quarter or fifth of the story in a way. Yeah. So I have some like, I'm glad I got to do all the other things I got to do, but it's incredible up to what he's doing now with the travel shows and the podcast. Like I admire his journey so much, and I only got to be part of it for, the beginning or the early beginning.
You were there for you were there for a good chunk. I thought the writing when you and Smigel were there were some of the best years. Was it obvious that Mike Sweeney would be the head writer after you? Was that just something that you thought would happen? Was there anybody else considered, or was it very much like Mike Sweeney would be good for this job?
I don't know exactly. I'm feeling that I was privy to the conversations between Conan and Jeff Ross on that, who would have been the decision makers. Maybe Andy would have had some input too. It just felt like the natural thing. He and I started on the same day, and I had been given the opportunity to do that first. He had been amazing. He was just smart and a natural leader. And it just felt like, I don't think there was much discussion. I think it was like, yeah, he should do it.
Jonathan Groff, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate this.
Of course, Mark. It's great. I love talking about this stuff, and it's such a amazing world, and your encyclopedic knowledge of it is amazing, mildly disturbing.
Oh, thanks. Yes, that's what I get constantly, but I appreciate it. I'm really excited to you and Todd Barry to hear some audio from back in the day.
Yes,
because you guys did such a good job. It was so
I'll
funny.
see what he says about if he can pull it up. He played something for me a year or so ago, like on his phone. He's like, "Yeah, this guy sent me this." I think it was maybe like a commercial. Might have been like we were auditioning for a commercial as those characters or something. I can't remember why he had it, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah, you and Todd killed as hard as anybody I've ever seen. So I really appreciate you doing this, Jonathan. Thank you so
Mark.
much, and good
Appreciate
luck
you.
with everything. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode. On Apple Podcasts, please rate it and leave a review. Be sure to go to LateNighter.com for all your late night TV news. And you can find my podcast at LateNighter.com/podcasts. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next Tuesday.